All signs seem to be pointing towards Mike Holmgren finally getting into Canton. Unfortunately, he only got one foot in the door and he'll have to wait another year. We'll take a deep dive why that's a problem for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, whether you're in nearby Tacoma, Washington, or across the country in Niagara Falls. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Mike Holmgren still has to wait another year for the Hall of Fame. We're going to discuss the ramifications of that, not just for Holmgren and the Seahawks franchise, but the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting committee at large. And then with the Super Bowl coming up this weekend, Nick and I are going to dish out our all-time Seahawks Super Bowl teams from all three squads that have made it to the big game in franchise history. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We really were hoping that we were going to come into today's show finally celebrating Mike Holmgren getting into Canton, getting fitted for his yellow jacket, his gold jacket, and getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, once again, coming up short. And look, I'm just going to be honest, Nick. I could take a more civil point of view on this and say, well, Sterling Sharp was deserving, injury-shortened career. I understand all of that stuff. But you only had 4 guys that were inducted to the Hall of Fame. It was the smallest class there's been since 2005. Come on, get Mike Holmgren in there as the 5th one. He was the only coach that made it as a finalist. And look, the fact of the matter is, and I know that total wins is not everything when we're looking at a coach's candidacy. If Mike Holmgren didn't have any Super Bowl victories, then I think this would be a moot point. But Nick, the last 6 head coaches that have gotten inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame had less wins than Mike Holmgren. He is the only coach other than Andy Reid that has led 2 teams to the Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl with one of those teams that isn't in Canton. And we know Andy Reid is going to be first ballot whenever he hangs up his whistle. Holmgren is the only omission. It is flat out embarrassing. And quite frankly, this is my viewpoint. I don't know where you stand on this, but I think that the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting committee, we have to question their credibility after not voting Mike Holmgren in with an 80% or higher threshold yesterday, especially when he should have been in probably a decade ago, and not getting in when there's no other coaches on the ballot and only 4 guys get elected. I think that this new system, this really makes the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting process, it makes it look like a sham. That's just my opinion.
Are we sure it's not the same guy that the only one that didn't vote for Ichiro in the Pro Football?
Did they put him in charge of the rules? Maybe that's the same guy. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Hall of Fame voting, I think, across sports needs a wholesale change. But yeah, I mean, the resume speaks for itself. Holmgren had, the coaching. I think a coaching tree is also a fun way to look at, what impact the coach had in Hall of Fame worthiness. Andy Reid, John Gruden are in that tree for him. I'd say that's a fairly good start. And, of course, the quarterbacks, Steve Young, Brett Favre, Joe Montana, Matt Hasselbeck, we'll talk about. It's very fitting we're talking this on today, where we're going to kind of dive into certainly the 2005 Seahawks Super Bowl, NFC Championship team. But it is a bummer. I mean, it's a shame. And, as Seattleites, as Pacific Northwesterners, we're used to being overlooked. We're used to being in that far left corner of the United States. The upper left, I think, is in that capital U, capital L, and kind of tucked away and forgotten about. And this is just another notch in that belt of, and I know he didn't completely make his entire resume in the Pacific Northwest in Green Bay and San Francisco, but we're kind of used to this. Unfortunately, he broke. I mean, just in Seattle, broke a 10-year playoff drought, 4 consecutive NFC West titles, brought them to the franchise's first Super Bowl. I mean, Seahawks fans know this, preaching to the choir here. More career wins than not just the last 6 Hall of Famers, but we're talking guys like more wins than Bud Grant, Joe Gibbs, Bill Cowher. Bill Cowher, I think, was the one for me where I'm like, okay, if Bill Cowher's getting in, I think it's time to have a serious conversation about Mike Holmgren and Tony Dungy too. More career playoff wins than Bill Parcells and John Madden. I know that the format's a little different, but when you can say that, I mean, the resume really speaks for itself. It's a real bummer. And you know, we can kind of dive into what does this look like for him down the road. But as you said, some changes have been made where it might be tougher down the line for him to get in. This did seem kind of like a nice happy medium for a class wise for Holmgren to get in. As you mentioned, the only coach is a finalist. But yeah, overall, I mean, the resume's there. It's just a matter of maybe, I don't know if it's politics with the voting or the process or what. Did he tick off the wrong person? I don't know what it is, but clearly something is falling short in the eyes of just enough voters. I'm not sure what it is because you look at the resume, and again, I've said it already, it speaks for itself.
There are a number of coaches, and look, I'm not taking shots at guys like Don Coryell, who obviously Air Coryell system, that is a huge part of the NFL's history. I understand that. I understand Jimmy Johnson, obviously, I don't care that he had just 80 wins in his career. He had 2 Super Bowl victories. I have no problem with that. Dick Vermeil had a 120 and 109 record, and he won a Super Bowl. How is Dick Vermeil, and I like Dick Vermeil, I think he was a great coach, but how is Dick Vermeil in the Hall of Fame and Mike Holmgren? I have some people that have messaged me like, well, this was a stepping stone. Mike Holmgren, he was the only coach that was a finalist. That is a positive step forward. No, it's not. He was a finalist in 2020 and did not get in. And then he didn't even get to the finalist round the last 3 years. Like, if I'm Mike Holmgren, I'm sick of hearing that music. Like, I was the only coach there. This is my opinion. And I understand that there's going to be some people that disagree with this because maybe there might be a year where there isn't an ideal person. But I think one coach or contributor has to be in the Hall of Fame every single year. Like, if you have no coaches that you deem that are worthy, then get a contributor in there. There should be 2 people from that senior contributor coach class that get in. There's too many people. I understand that they wanted to make it, hey, this is the best of the best. We're going to make it more difficult for guys to get in. I think they went too far. And you should have 5 people minimum in every Hall of Fame class with the number of players that there are, the coaches, the contributors that have impacted the game. And again, I'll keep spouting all this stuff off, but Mike Holmgren, 161 wins. You look at the data compared to the other coaches that have got in, like Tony Dungy had a phenomenal win-loss percentage. Like Tony Dungy fully deserved to be in there. Bill Cowher, look, basically his numbers are the same as Mike Holmgren, other than Holmgren coached a few more years. They're roughly the same win-loss percentage. Holmgren's got double-digit more wins, double-digit more losses. They're pretty similar overall in terms of win-loss category. Tom Flores, I understand the history there, and he won a Super Bowl, but Tom Flores was 97 and 87 as a coach. Vermeil, 120, 109. Most of these coaches are not close to Mike Holmgren with his record. And he got to the Super Bowl with 3 teams, if you include his time as an offensive coordinator, which he was the play caller in San Francisco. And then all the coaches that have come up from underneath him, Andy Reid being the most notable, John Gruden, as you mentioned. There have been others that landed head coaching jobs in the NFL that worked under Mike Holmgren. He was outstanding at developing coaches into future head coaches. I mean, I can just keep rattling off all these numbers. It just makes – I'm not going to say it's as bad as Ichiro not being unanimous because that might have been the worst thing I have ever seen in Hall of Fame voting at any sport, but it's right up there in terms of look, the foot was already in the door. He was out of the car. Like, get him into the Hall of Fame where he has belonged for the last 10 years. I just do not, I can't fathom why this isn't happening, especially this year when he was the only coach. This was the year he needed to get in because here's what I'm worried about. As somebody that has had the opportunity to speak with Holmgren a few times and watch what he did in his time with the Seahawks, turning them into a perennial power in the NFC West, a team that got to a Super Bowl, competed in the playoffs a bunch. When I look at what's coming next, Bill Belichick is eligible next year for the Hall of Fame. Bill Belichick is going to be a first ballot. He's going to get it. because they've changed it. You only have to be out of the league for 1 year. And then Andy Reid, if the Chiefs win this weekend, I would not be shocked if Andy Reid walks away. I mean, what else has he got to do? He's won so many Super Bowls already. I can see Andy Reid retiring, and then that clock means a year later he's eligible to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. You're looking in that case at 2027 being the earliest, and there's going to be other coaches that'll be in the mix there potentially at that point. I think he's going to get in. He will get in. But to me, the fact that it's been more than 15 years since he coached the NFL and he's still not in the Hall of Fame is an absolute joke.
Yeah, it's kind of shades of Edgar Martinez with the Mariners a little bit, where you're just pounding the table for a decade, pretty much, before he finally got the call. And I will say with the Andy Reid thing, I actually am of the opposite opinion. I don't think he's going to retire. I think he's just that guy that's going to just die on the field. So that
I hope that really doesn't happen.
Well, of course, but we're talking like 10 years from now or something. But I think that could be to Holmgren's advantage, maybe after Belichick, because if Reid keeps going, maybe that will kind of open up a little bit of a bubble under there for Holmgren, which is ironic because Andy Reid came from the Mike Holmgren tree, which should just be a light bulb for people.
Yep, that's really the good point, is just the number of coaches. He's got one of the best coaching trees that we've seen in the last 25, 30 years. He has had so many great coaches that he has tutored underneath him. He's got a couple of Super Bowl winners in Gruden, as well as Andy Reid that came up on his staff in Green Bay. So he belongs in Canton. And listen, we'll all start pulling for 2026 here soon. We'll start doing what we need to do to try to help Mike get in. But this one really hurts much worse than the other close ones because there weren't any other coaches to compete against. And that really makes it difficult to swallow him not getting in this year, especially with only 4 inductees. That is still the thing that bothers me the most, that there's only 4 men that got inducted when we know there are more that are worthy for being in Canton, that are among the best of the best ever to coach or play the game in the NFL. When we come back, the Super Bowl's coming up this weekend. We're going to take a step down memory lane, a few steps down memory lane, and put together our own all-time Seahawks Super Bowl squads. We'll be on the offensive side of the ball. That'll start coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time for painting and drawing during the off season. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you the most so you can do more of it. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Don't just take my word for it. Therapy has worked wonders for numerous people over the course of the years with BetterHelp. You can get BetterHelp now entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We've got the Super Bowl coming up in New Orleans on Sunday. Chiefs and Eagles. If that sounds familiar, well, it's only a few years ago that these two teams battled for the Lombardi Trophy. Philadelphia is going to hope to get the last laugh this time around. Well, Kansas City looks to become the first franchise ever to win 3 straight Super Bowls. We're not going to talk about that game, though, because we want to talk Seahawks. Let's talk all-time Seahawks Super Bowl roster. And since they have now had 3 teams that have played in the big game, and there's maybe a little bit more drama trying to come up with these rosters. Obviously, there's going to be ones that you and I both are in full agreement on, and there may be a few differences that we have. I want to start on the offensive side of the ball, Nick, with the skill positions. And I felt like more so than any other part of this exercise that this was a case where you're looking at what kind of flavor you prefer, because there were different styles of offenses that these Seahawks teams that made the Super Bowl had. All 3 of them had some differences and some personnel differences. ultimately it's what flavor speaks to you in terms of the all-time Seahawks team.
Right. I think, there's a debate of here we go, 11 personnel or 12 or 21 personnel. So as far as the skill positions on offense, for me, it's going to start with Russell Wilson, the quarterback. Now, he does get maybe a little bit of extra credit because he won the Super Bowl. Granted, yes, he didn't throw for 450 yards and 6 touchdowns in that Super Bowl, but just statistically rewrote the record books in Seattle. Still, I think the most overall, talented and fulfillment of that talent quarterback the Seahawks have ever had to this point. So I'm going to go Russell Wilson. And I kind of took this, Corbin, as a view, just kind of a disclaimer at the start. I took this as, taking each of these players at their best or at their prime. If we could line up all these players from 05, 13, and 14 and just pick them all from their prime, I know that's kind of a fantasy world thing. But that's where I started it from. So Russell Wilson for me at quarterback. And then this is where it really got fun for me, Corbin, was running back. Because obviously, the 2 best running backs in Seahawks history were in those 3 Super Bowls in Marshawn Lynch and Shaun Alexander. I went with Marshawn Lynch because, one, he has a few more iconic moments. The Beastquake, of course. Just the dominant attitude that the Seahawks were running with in 2013 and 2014. And he also did so against a way worse offensive line, or with a way worse offensive line. Because Shaun Alexander, I'm not trying to discredit him, but he played with a much better offensive line than what Marshawn Lynch was dealing with as the running back of Seattle. So my first 2 are running back, Marshawn Lynch, quarterback, Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go a little different tangent here just because I felt like Matt Hasselbeck did more to carry the Seattle Seahawks to a Super Bowl than, say, Russell Wilson. Matt Hasselbeck did not have the Legion of Boom on the other side. And this is not me saying that Russell Wilson is worse than Matt Hasselbeck. I think Russell Wilson was the better quarterback overall, had the better career in Seattle. But Matt Hasselbeck, this was an offense, even with Shaun Alexander, with what he did out of the backfield. Matt Hasselbeck, to me, he had to carry a little bit more of a burden on his shoulders, running this West Coast offense and getting the ball out quickly to his receivers, letting them make plays. And he had to overcome a number of years, including some of his own mistakes. I mean, we know that Packers wild card game that before they won a Super Bowl gave me nightmares. Finally he could put it to rest when they won a Super Bowl, but we want the ball and we're going to score. He put all those miscues that he had to go through, the adversity to finally get the team to a Super Bowl. So I'm going to go with Hasselbeck. Now, you and I are in agreement on Lynch, and that was hard for me because I love Shaun Alexander. I think Shaun Alexander, another guy that absolutely should be in Canton, in my opinion, but I think Marshawn Lynch is a Hall of Fame running back too. I think both these guys were among the very best in their respective eras, and I just think Marshawn Lynch just brings that tenacity to your offense. And this is where you and I were different. You were talking about different personnel groupings. Of course I'm going to put a fullback in because Max Strong, he was a crucial part of Shaun Alexander's success. He was an excellent fullback, all-around player. He could catch the ball. He could run the ball when he needed him to. The guy played like 16 years in the league. He was a battering ram, smashed people as a blocker. No offense to Jermaine Kearse and some of the other receivers that could have been that third receiver, but if I'm putting together the all-time Seahawks Super Bowl team, I'm playing smash mouth football with Marshawn Lynch. And no offense to Michael Robinson. Michael Robinson could have been in this discussion, but he wasn't Max Strong. Max Strong was a Mack truck, and I would want him in my lineup blocking for Marshawn Lynch. And let's play some good old-fashioned black and blue football.
I knew you were going to go that route, so I'll go differently. I see there's some finding comedy in me picking one of my receivers. I'll explain why. So my 3 receivers, I have 3. You have 2. Doug Baldwin, one of the better rags to riches story in franchise history. Jermaine Kearse, for me, this is it. Jermaine Kearse, that catch he made in 2014 would be on par with the helmet catch of David Tyree with the Giants if the Seahawks had won. I will beat down drywall to drive that home. Jermaine Kearse made some fantastic catches. That catch, in my opinion, had they sealed the deal, got the repeat over the Patriots, that catch would be just as iconic, in my opinion. And then third, Darrell Jackson. And I'm going to explain why, because there's some special teams returning players that I kind of slotted otherwise, Golden Tate. So hang on for a second if you think that's funny. Darrell Jackson, 3,000-yard seasons in 4 years with the Seahawks. His 80.3 yards per game in 2005 is the fourth best in franchise history. So he's very productive. Obviously, there's a bit of a tier system with these receivers. So I went Kearse, Baldwin, Jackson, and then at tight end, I went Zach Miller. I just kind of where you were going. I like the attitude. Made some key blocks, a few big catches down the stretch. And I also saw him at Disneyland that offseason with his family, and he was a nice enough guy. So I'm a little biased too. So I'm going to go Zach Miller for my tight end.
Yeah, Jeremy Stevens had his moments, but Jeremy Stevens also dropped a lot of passes.
He also had his moments.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So yeah, I'm going with Zach Miller too, and for my two receivers, it was hard because I had to pick between Darrell Jackson and Jermaine Kearse, and overall, I just felt like Darrell Jackson had a slightly better career than what Jermaine Kearse had overall, and I will always be sympathetic for Darrell Jackson because that touchdown that the refs took away from him in that Super Bowl, I still think that was one of the most egregious calls that I have ever seen in a Super Bowl. And there were a couple that were in that same game that could stack up there. But again, I'm not saying the Steelers won it because of the refs. I'm not going down that road. That play, though, Darrell Jackson should have had a touchdown. I'm sorry. He should have had a touchdown in the Super Bowl. And there'd be a much different viewpoint, I think, from a lot of Seahawks fans. And let's go to the offensive line now, keeping that in mind. You and I both had Zach Miller. We have mostly the same receivers. The only difference is I got fullback, and you got that third receiver. Offensive line, for me, I'm going to maybe draw a little bit of ire for one of the selections that I'm going to make here, but let me explain. The rest of this, to me, seems like this is chalk. Walter Jones, obviously, no offense, Russell Okung. You're not Walter Jones. Steve Hutchinson, the best left guard in franchise history. Max Unger, we know how that's been felt since the Seahawks traded him. To me, the best center they've ever had. Chris Gray was an underrated player on that really good line in 2005. I'm going to go with Brendo Giacomini as my right tackle because, look, Sean Locklear had his moments. He was easily the weak point, though, of that 2005 offensive line. And 2014, you had a rookie in Justin Britt that was playing right tackle. And Justin Britt had to move inside a couple years later. He was just a functional right tackle at best. So Brendo Giacomini, I know he got a lot of holds, but you had to go with the territory. The guy also mauled people, and I loved how physical he was. I just think the identity here, you got to have that nasty dude at right tackle. So Brendo Giacomini is that guy for me.
I went Justin Britt at right tackle just because of the overall value he provided, his versatility over the years with the Seahawks. And with Max Unger, people are joking and eye rolls coming with my Marvel reference again. But, Deadpool, the anchor being concept, people are joking that Harambe dying in 2016 was this timeline's anchor being, and the timeline has been in disarray since then for us here on planet Earth. Max Unger might have been the anchor being for Seahawks. He might have been the anchor being that the Seahawks got rid of, and the timeline has kind of been in shambles ever since. That's kind of how I view the parting of Max Unger, which is a compliment to him, of course, with the value. So I went with Justin Britt for the versatility, and he wasn't a Pro Bowl right tackle, but just he bounced around a lot, was overall fairly reliable and solid. And then Max Unger. Just wish the Seahawks would find another Max Unger. Darn it.
As far as kicker goes, look, kickers are offensive players. They're special teams, but they put points on the board. This is all about house money. Josh Brown did some good things. He had some good season in Seattle, but Stephen house money is the one that is getting my selection. And as far as kick returners go, I know this is going to be crazy because the dude got traded like a year later, and we know the black eye incident, but like Percy Harvin returned a kickoff for a touchdown in the Super Bowl. You got to have Percy Harvin as your kick and punt returner.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I'm sorry. I know he played for the Seahawks for like 12 minutes. I don't care. That is one of the most iconic. Those 12
minutes were glorious.
Yeah, they were glorious, and I still that was the moment because I was with some friends at the Super Bowl, and they didn't quite know as much about football as I did. And during the halftime, they're like, "Oh man, we got this." I'm like, "Guys, this is Peyton Manning with 2013 Broncos." Like, guys, settle down. This game is not over. As soon as he ran back that kick, I'm like, "Guys, the Seahawks are winning the Super Bowl," and that was it.
Yeah, that was really the clincher. Felt like, okay, now I'm not dreaming anymore. The Seahawks are they're gonna win this game because they are pounding them. I did not think it was gonna be 43-8, but that's what it ended up being. When we come back, we're gonna keep building this all-time Super Bowl roster on the defensive side of the football, and of course, punters are people too. So we're gonna get that aspect of special teams too. That's coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, Saquon Barkley, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get into the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets at the game as it unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's your icing on the proverbial cake. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. With the big game coming up, there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get into the action. You pick more or less on at least two-player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. And Prize Picks is sweetening the pot this year, with Patrick Mahomes only needing to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board. I'm feeling pretty good about Travis Kelce having a strong game against the Eagles defense. And what I love most about Prize Picks, fast, safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in the account in as little as 15 minutes. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet milling winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Here's our offer for our Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. A little bit of self-promotion for both of us here. Make sure to check out the new venture that Nick and I launched, the Emerald City Spectrum. All Seattle sports all the time. We even got some Kraken content up today, courtesy of Nick. So make sure to check that out, emeraldcityspectrum.com. Let's get back to our Seahawks all-time Super Bowl rosters, Nick. We've done the offense. We've done kicker, kick, and punt returner. Let's get to the defensive side of the ball. And honestly, I wish there was a little more drama with this, but when you have potential Hall of Famers all over your defense in 2013 and 2014, it kind of takes a little bit of the drama out of it. With that being said, I do think that there's an interesting debate to be had at the defensive tackle position when you're looking at these three Super Bowl teams.
I know there was a bit of a debate where I'm like, okay, let's just take the 2013 team and just slide in the 2005 offensive line. That's kind of where some of it came from. But yeah, Michael Bennett, most sacks of any Seahawk post 2004, pretty much a no-brainer. Cliff Averill, one of the better free agent signings in the Seahawks history, 8 sacks that 2013 run, also a sack and a half, and 2 forced fumbles in that playoff run in 2013. So pretty easy selection. Brandon Meebane, belly roll himself, was another one. That was a fairly easy call. And then I kind of diverted a little bit with Kevin Williams. I understand Kevin Williams was not his like all-pro Pro Bowl peak self in 2014, but in my fantasy world, because it was my picks and my little fantasy world, I went with Kevin Williams, picturing him in his prime. He was a really good interior defensive lineman in his prime, and he still was good in 2014. I think he had like 3 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, so fairly productive for his age and the tread on his tires. But and still another guy that's kind of like borderline Hall of Fame. So Kevin Williams was kind of where I diverted from you a little bit, and Brandon Meebane I think was the easy one. But I know you went a little bit different direction at D tackle.
I did, yeah. You and I were on the same tangent with the edge rushers. I mean, I will admit, if we're talking about guys the way they were playing when the team made the Super Bowl, there was a glimmer of thought put into Grant Wistrom at the defensive end position for that 2005 team. And it was kind of a brief spark in his time in Seattle because he had his best years with the Rams and won a Super Bowl there. But Grant Wistrom was really good for the Seahawks in 2005. That being said, Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill, those guys have to be on there. Brandon Mebane, to me, he is in that next tier behind, obviously, Cortez Kennedy being the best DT in Seahawks history. But I think that next tier, you got to include Brandon Mebane. And then I think one of the guys who is criminally underrated, I actually probably shouldn't have used that verbiage, but Rocky Bernard, the defensive tackle for the Seahawks in 2005. Rocky Bernard actually had a couple years where he flirted with double-digit sacks. This guy could get after the quarterback. He was a solid run defender, really was an unheralded part of that defense that got the Seahawks to the Super Bowl in 2005. And you and I are looking at it maybe similar in a lot of ways, but Kevin Williams I actually thought about because he played fine in 2014. He had good numbers, as you mentioned, but Rocky Bernard, to me, was a more impactful player in a Seahawks uniform. So that's why I chose to go that route. And then at the linebacker spot, Bobby Wagner and Lofa Tatupu would be my top two. Because Bobby Wagner in his prime could have played Mike. He could play any of those linebacker spots. Bobby Wagner was that talent coming into the NFL. Lofa Tatupu was a rookie in 2005 and made an all-pro team. The guy was fantastic out of the gate early in his career coming out of USC. So those two, and then you have to have KJ Wright in this roster as well. I think you've got to have three linebackers based on the three teams and how big the linebackers were to their success. So I've got those three as my linebackers. It's pretty cut and dry with those three players.
Yeah, this typical 4-3 defense. I know there's some positional versatility. How does Bruce Irvin maybe fit into this a little bit? Wagner, Wright, Tupu. Pretty easy call there. And then we get to the Legion of Boom status. And really, I think we kind of can all agree, obviously, that the trinity of the Legion of Boom, which is Sherman at corner and the two safeties, Chancellor and Earl Thomas. And then we both kind of went back and forth with, I directly compared Marcus Trufant to maybe Byron Maxwell. And I'll take Trufant in his prime. Can you imagine Marcus Trufant's prime with the 2014 Seahawks? Maybe they get the job done. I don't know. But that was certainly he was one of that era, that premier corner for the Seahawks. And then so him having being opposite Richard Sherman in this scenario would be really fun. Talk about a Legion of Boom, that Legion of Atomic Bomb. I don't know what that would be, but that was so Trufant was the main.
It's the Legion of Bomb Cyclone. Let's make it.
Yeah, there we go. Legion of Bomb Cyclone. I like that a lot. So yeah, Legion of Boom minus Byron Maxwell, addition of Marcus Trufant.
Yeah, and I think you could make an argument. I mean, I think Marcus Trufant is very best. He was a Pro Bowler. We never saw that of Byron Maxwell. I think part of it, though, is Byron Maxwell was just overshadowed by all the talent around him. I think you can make strong cases for both those guys. So I definitely thought about Byron Maxwell. The Seahawks had okay safety play in 2005, but we're talking Hall of Fame caliber guys from the Legion of Boom. So this was very cut and dry for me. And offense, you could make some debates about a number of positions. Like you could talk quarterback, you could talk running back with Lynch and Alexander. Receiver, there were some interesting debates to be had. But I think that 2013 and 2014 defense, just how historically great that they were, there aren't going to be very many guys. I mean, Tatupu, Trufant, Bernard, those are really the ones that you can make a case for being able to cut into that lineup. And because I even thought, Malcolm Smith was a Super Bowl MVP. I thought about him, but it's I loved Malcolm Smith, but KJ Wright was the better player. So, there really weren't a lot of arguments to be made on that side of the ball. And then from the punter position, it's obvious on that one too. I mean, we got to have John Ryan. They don't even get to their second Super Bowl in a row without that miraculous fake field goal touchdown pass that generated maybe the greatest sports meme in the history of Seattle sports. So John Ryan's got to be that one as well as your punter. And if we want to have the long snapper, then I would think that you've got to go with the long snapper from those 2013 and 2014 teams as well. Although I think you can make a case for both, but let's go with Clint Gresham for that one as well.
Yeah, agreed. And I kind of also split the punt returner, kick returner into two. I went kick returner. We went Percy Harvin. I'm going to go Golden Tate, punt returner, second most punt return yards in franchise history in 2013. I wanted to maybe slide him in at receiver as well. He was a very talented receiver, but to maximize the potential of the receiver room and the skill group room, I'll slide Golden Tate, a punt returner.
Yep, I think that we are in agreement on that. And I think that the kick return game of that 2005 team, it just wasn't, you didn't have the weapons that the 2013 and 2014 teams did. So certainly this would be a really fun all-time Seahawks Super Bowl team. There's other teams that made a lot more Super Bowls or have more players to pick from, but I would take this Seahawks roster with how good that team was in 2013, 2014, and 2005. Those were a pretty darn good team too. I think the Seahawks could fare pretty well if you had a Madden game that had the all-time Super Bowl teams for every franchise. Some teams would not have one, obviously, but the Seahawks, they've had 3 of those squads. They're pretty decent teams. So anyway, as always, you can follow me up next in Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your shows to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, Rob Rang and I are going to start taking a look at free agency because guess what? With the Super Bowl in the rearview mirror, you're going to have less than a month till the signing begins. We're going to start diving into some interior free agents that the Seahawks could look at re-signing, and we'll start talking about some offensive linemen that the Seahawks might be able to get in free agency as well. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy your weekend. Go Hawks.